Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Enable Boot Camp. Today it's our Cyber Liability Insurance Boot Camp getting started. So, if this is the first time you've heard this accent, howdy. I'm Louis Pope. I'm one of the head nerds at Enable. My focus is on security. I come from the MSP space myself. I did freelance and consultation work for a long time before I spent about 6 years helping a break fix business mature into an MSP. I've had a total of 10 years working at and assisting MSPs with Enable for the past 4 years. Formal education is electronic engineering and computer engineering, and I'm an SSCP, System Security Certified Practitioner. So I am very much a down in the trenches, getting dirty, implementation of security controls type of person. For our agenda today, so we've got a lot to pack in. We have 2 hours, 2.5 hours reserved for the boot camp. We will probably consume all 2.5 hours of that time. We will have a few breaks here and there to give people a chance to step away, take a break, take a stretch, answer an email or two. But we're going to start out with, the what and whys of insurance. What is cyber liability insurance? Uh, the fact that MSPs and clients need their own coverage. We're going to be covering that. Insurance questionnaires, what those look like. Some special considerations for MSPs, since everybody here is going to be IT providers or MSPs of different flavors and shapes. And what happens once a policy is signed? What can you expect? And then we'll also have some sample questions on the end that we'll be able to go through, talk through, and that'll be a good opportunity for everybody to ask for clarification on some of these, because these are going to be sample questions that have been taken directly from um, cyber liability insurance applications. And we'll work through, how do how do you answer them? When do you answer yes? When do you answer no? When you answer no, how do you still, approach the insurance provider to, contend that that no doesn't mean you should raise my premium? And just a disclaimer out in front, because whenever it comes to cyber insurance and sometimes just insurance in general, every engagement is going to be a different adventure. The cyber liability insurance in particular is not homogenous. Not everybody does everything the same way. There may be similar policies, but they're never going to be exactly the same. You're going to have to read a policy to understand what is and is not covered in a policy. There is no shortcut around that. You can make no assumptions, and the only way you know is by reading the policies. Satisfying an insurance underwriter to get a policy in the first place, well, that's just the first challenge. The follow-up challenge after that is going to be satisfying the insurer's demands whenever you file a claim. So we're going to be covering today that first part. That second part of what happens once you file a claim, we'll touch on that a little bit, but that itself would be another 2.5 3 hour boot camp. Um, and of course, you're putting your business on the line here whenever you're interacting with insurance providers, especially whenever you're interacting with them on behalf of your clients. So if you are ever unsure, seek legal counsel that is familiar with the MSP space and insurance. And starting out with just a simple question: what is insurance and why do businesses need it? Anybody who has ever been to any of my other boot camps or office hours know that I like starting out with the basics. I want to make sure everybody is on the same page, because, everybody is in here from, everybody here is going to be in different positions, different roles, different responsibilities. You're going to be at different parts of your journey as an MSP. So we're going to spend a little bit of time in the first 30 minutes or so just getting everybody up to speed on a few things. And first is with insurance. Its purpose: it is there to share the burden of risk. You are exchanging premium payments in return for an insurer sharing the final financial risks of you operating your business with you. And those financial payments to cover those potential losses, The whole point of it there again is to help a business manage your risk exposure. This allows businesses to continue to operate when the risk may otherwise be too great, as well as softening any financial burdens that may arise due to a covered event. There are not a lot of businesses that can afford to pay out of pocket for major incidents. This is why we have all kinds of different insurance available for businesses. And we're going to start out talking about a few of those insurances just because, again, I like getting everybody on the same page. So, first is going to be commercial general liability insurance. So, before we get into, again, before we get into cyber liability insurance, we're going to spend some time talking about some other insurances because it helps you to know what is covered underneath these other forms of insurance and where the gaps are that need that is really those gaps are why you need the cyber liability insurance. Depending on, and again, depending on where you are as in your journey, if this is the first time you've heard about some of these types of insurance, don't worry, don't feel like you've missed anything. These are more, these are more on the business side of things than they are on the technical knowledge of things. So if this is your first exposure, great, you're getting your first exposure and then you can continue your learning path. A one person MSP, of course, may need to carry less coverage than other large multi office MSPs, but the risk profile of your clients is going to affect any final decisions on your coverage needed. And then, your client's own coverage will have to be evaluated based on their risk profile. And there is some effort and some work that's going to go into that. But as with most services out there where there's multiple vendors in the marketplace, there's going to be some commonalities, but you can't really make any assumptions about what one insurer covers under a policy will be included in coverage by another insurer. They may also refer to the same coverage with different names or use similar names for different coverage. This means, well, you're really going to have no choice. You will have to apply due care and read everything related to an insurance policy provided by an insurer. There is no way around that. For our first type of insurance, commercial general liability insurance, if there is one must have insurance out there for businesses, it is commercial general liability insurance. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as business liability or general liability. Most of these policies will provide protection against financial loss for a set of common liability claims your business might face due to the actions of the business, an employee, or even a third party. Bodily injury and property damage are commonly covered under this type of policy. For an MSP, a good, scenario for this to understand where this would come into play. For an MSP, the cost of repairing damaged infrastructure caused by, a technician that's out on site, dropping, doing some Cat5 drops, they're running new wires and they're cutting into drywall and you know what, they nick an existing Cat6 cable or Cat5 cable. And technician's going to have to fix that. They're going to have to replace it. And you're probably just going to eat that cost. They're just going to do the work. You're going to absorb the cost of it. And that's it. You're never going to file a claim on it. But if, it's a little more serious, they nick a water line and that causes water damage that requires drywall to be replaced and carpet to be replaced and for a plumber to come out on site and fix the water pipe, that's when you're going to be glad you've got this type of coverage. Next type of coverage is business interruption. This is going to be for your situations where, what happens if you have a construction crew out in front of a business and they cut the ISP's fiber outside. And then, you're without internet for the rest of the week. If you experience loss of revenue or have to pay for employees to use their cellular data on their phones to keep things running, then business interruption insurance may cover those losses for you. Sometimes it's referred to as business income insurance or contingent business interruption coverage. It's there to help cover operating expenses like loan payments, payroll, taxes, or other expenses you have to incur while you run your business during a covered event. Typically, this type of coverage has lots of thresholds and lots of caveats for what it will and will not cover. Some of the things it will not cover typically are losses due to floods or pandemics or other force majeure. Um, so you'll want to pay close attention when exploring this type of insurance to make sure it is going to cover the events you expect it to cover. Our next type of insurance is workers' compensation. And if you are a one man show, sole proprietorship, this may be something you've avoided. It may be something that's actually, you have anxiety about it. And it's actually one of the reasons why you're not hiring more people or why you're sticking to 1099 contracts. Um, Workers' compensation insurance is required of U.S. employers. Um, and it covers lost wages and medical expenses incurred by an employee who's injured or becomes ill during the course of performing their job. While paying out those fees again, paying out those fees and taxes, along with the complexity of setting this up and managing workers' comp, can be intimidating for first-time business owners. I know with my MSP, whenever I went through it the first time, it was a headache. I had to ask for a lot of help. But great news is that's what CPAs are for most of the time. Um, but it can be seen as, and this is personally the way I look at it, this is just you protecting one of your most important investments, and that is your employees. The time, effort, and resources you put into your employees, you need to protect that resource, and workers' compensation is one of the ways you do that. And also for the fact that it's simply just required by, U.S. law in most jurisdictions. Product liability. Well, sometimes this is included in general liability insurance, but it can be a separate policy altogether. And again, the only way you know is if you read. Uh, Product liability insurance provides coverage for claims that a product you sold, made, or distributed caused damage to an individual or their property. This doesn't provide a guarantee or warranty on products sold by your business. There are different insurance vehicles for that, but its role is to provide protection for a business from the fallout that can occur in the event that a product you sold causes damage or injury. Product liability coverage can help pay for legal fees, judgments, or other settlement costs. Uh, an easy scenario to understand this that's kind of related to MSPs is for where product liability insurance could come into play is if you purchase and resell uninterruptible power supplies. The vendor's warranty, that's going to cover the replacement cost of a unit that fails. But if a unit fails and it causes fire damage, the MSP's client, your client, whoever you sold it to, they will probably have the option of suing the MSP for damages to cover their own losses incurred by the product that was sold to them. This is one of those kind of just, this is the way the world works situations. And if you've never appreciated this, might be a little bit of a shock, but there is nothing to stop a business that you have a support contract with or that you do work with, that you sell a UPS to them, and that UPS, it fails, it blows up, and it takes a server with them, or it causes other property damage. You could potentially find yourself on the hook for that, and the client can, look to recoup their losses from you. This is where product liability insurance can, come in and protect you and provide for covering those costs. Next type of insurance is professional liability, sometimes referred to as errors and omission insurance. It offers protection for business professionals such as attorneys, consultants, or assuming everybody that's here today, MSPs, from damages caused by negligence or misconduct in the delivery of their services. This is for, just the anything you do or don't do in the delivery of your professional services that causes damage for a client may be covered by professional liability insurance. providing for assistance with covering settlements and other legal fees. Professional liability insurance is, sometimes it is overlooked by MSPs, especially smaller MSPs, even though it is very common among other professional services. I can guarantee you that your any lawyer, CPA, or medical professional you run into is going to have an E&O or professional liability coverage. And it should be under consideration for all MSPs because some of the protections it offers are not available under other policies. It's also often requested by clients that a provider of a professional service has professional liability insurance as a condition of entering into a contract with them in the first place. So if you're seeking out contracts with larger businesses or with municipalities, counties, other public entities, this may be a requirement for them. Commercial property insurance, also known as commercial property insurance, business property insurance. It protects against physical losses of business assets due to specific recognized causes. Damages arising out of general wear and tear, acts of God, force majeure, and other natural disasters are not typically covered. So things like fire, burst pipes, theft, and vandalism are often covered, but insurers do allow, or most insurers do allow, for customization of policies to or additional policy riders that cover more types of events. Policies are also often will dictate only assets at a specific business location, such as an office or storage unit, is what's covered. Common items covered under commercial property insurance would be your computers, printers, network equipment, furniture, signage, inventory, and even some third-party property. So for MSPs, this has the potential to offer protection for a substantial part of your capital investments against common losses. And this is another one of those insurances that most small businesses and up are going to have. So now that brings us to cyber insurance. Cyber liability insurance, alternatively, you may hear it referred to as cybersecurity insurance or just cyber insurance, provides coverage for losses a business may incur arising from cyber attacks, data breaches, or other technology related risks. The goal of cyber liability insurance is to protect a business from the cost associated with insurable risk around data privacy, security, and operations, with the most prominent of those risks currently being ransomware and extortion post ransomware. Cyber liability insurance offers coverage against risk through different types of policy agreements. Some insurers may provide only a single cyber liability policy, while others offer to cover cyber liability risk through multiple distinct policy agreements. Some insurers may also offer most insurers will also offer first and third party cyber liability insurance separately, and the distinction between them is very important for MSPs and other IT providers to understand. And this is one of those, oh, I didn't know that moments for a lot of people. First party cyber liability insurance. So, first party liability insurance provides coverage for cyber attacks, data breaches, or other covered events involving the insured business, and can help reduce the financial impact associated with responding to the event. First party coverage is often going to include providing assistance with covering the cost of incident response, post threat event investigations, ransomware payments or recovery from ransomware attacks, business continuity costs, notifying individuals about exposure of PII, PHI, or PAN information. Most post-incident public relations services to repair, repair or prevent damage to a business's reputation, credit monitoring or identity protection services, or really just any activities related to recovering from an exciting event. But all of this is for the insured company itself. Then you have third-party cyber liability insurance. Third-party insurance provides coverage for the insured business against claims made by a third party that the actions of the insured business cause damage to the third party. This provides protection for businesses like MSPs and other IT service providers that are responsible for maintaining a client's IT infrastructure or defending a client against cyber attacks, data breaches, or other security incidents. An important distinction for MSPs is that third-party cyber liability insurance does not provide for covering the financial cost of a client associated with responding to an incident. It only protects the insured business in the event the third party seeks to recover damages incurred because of a cyber incident. This means that if a client does not have their own first-party cyber liability coverage, then the cost of responding to an incident will have to come out of their own pocket, or, and this is why having you as an MSP having third-party insurance is so important, they can seek to recover their losses by suing. And this is why, and again, first party and third party cyber liability covers the insured entity only. There is no conveyance that occurs. This is something that, we'll be talking about this later, but this is a very important thing to appreciate whenever you are having the risk conversation with clients. For those who are not familiar with how insurance works, some common assumptions that they will have is, since I have commercial liability insurance and cyber insurance, my client is covered too. Or my client already has cyber liability insurance, so I don't need to carry any. After we've been through some of the differences there between first party and third party cyber liability and how it works, it should be a little bit more apparent that those are misconceptions that can cost a business dearly after a cyber incident. As an MSP or an IT service provider, the first party cyber liability coverage you receive for your own business does not confer any benefits to the client if they suffer a cyber threat event. They will still have to file a claim with their own insurance provider or try and recoup their losses through suing the MSP. And this is why, there is no piggybacking. Your business and your client need their own coverage. Just because one has it does not relieve the other party from needing their own coverage. And this is one of those really important distinctions that I think, gets people sometimes, especially with the clients of MSPs, because they're bad for making assumptions, and if you don't correct their assumptions, they're going to continue to have those assumptions. So we're hit our first little Q&A section. So I haven't seen any questions coming through while we've been going through these first couple of slides. If there is anything anybody wants me to go back over and dive in a little bit deeper on, or you want me to, or there's a tangential question you would like to get an answer for on what we've already covered, throw it in the questions panel. I'll answer those here, and I'll give everybody just a minute, about 30 seconds to a minute to put in those questions. If we don't have any questions, we'll move on to the next section. Here's a great question. We're getting some in here. What percentage of MSPs currently have cyber liability insurance? I have not seen anything that is a recent survey, but the last time I saw a survey performed, it was about 6 months ago, 8 months ago, and the cyber liability insurance was around probably the 50 to 60% mark, and didn't have any information on why it was that way. But we are getting to the point with cyber liability insurance, because of just the nature of the world and the way things are right now, it's getting out of it. We're getting out of the, well, if other businesses aren't doing it, do I really need to do it, into the, no, it's just best, it's just common knowledge, best practices at this point to do it. And to not do it, you need a very good reason why you shouldn't be doing it at this point. And is there a handout for later reference on this material? So this session is being recorded. There will be, and it will make its way into the MSP Institute as a recording later. Um, there is not a handout for today's session, but there will be a handout in, whenever it makes it through content review. There will be a handout in maybe a few weeks or a month that's going to be all of this content in written form so that you can reference it. Here's another great question. If a client of an MSP is a victim of a cybersecurity event and blames the MSP, what type of insurance would protect the MSP? So this is going to be, whenever that claim is filed by the client, they're going to go file it with their insurance provider. And then the insurance provider is going to say, well, we need information and proof in XYZ. And also, we're going to engage this third party um, digital forensics incident response team that's going to come in, evaluate the situation, and assign, for lack of a better way of saying it, assign blame. And if the blame is assigned to the MSP because the MSP was provably negligent in the delivery of a service, then that's where your E&O, and potentially, definitely your E&O or your professional services insurance, as well as your cyber liability and your third party cyber liability insurance would come into play. If the audit is done and it's like, nope, the MSP did everything that they were supposed to do, everything was in scope of the services that were delivered, and it was, whatever went wrong because it was a risk that the MSP informed the client of, and the MSP has a signature from the client that says, yes, you told me about this problem and we're not going to address it. It's back to the client and for their insurance to have to handle. So it's always going to be dependent upon the situation you may find yourself in. And, you know, buying insurance after the fact is not an option. You have to have insurance prior to something happening, which means the only way you're going to be sure to have the proper coverage in place to protect yourself is you're going to have to already have those types of insurance. You're going to need, general liability, your E&O professional services, and your first and third party cyber liability insurance, or as we're about to talk about, your data breach insurance. So data breach insurance is a little bit different than cyber liability insurance. Some insurers offer data breach insurance separately from their cyber liability insurance, and often it'll have a narrower scope of what qualifies for coverage than cyber liability insurance. Data breach insurance offers first party coverage for covering costs associated with a breach where PII, personally identifiable information, PAN, or other covered sensitive information is stolen, lost, or otherwise improperly shared with an unauthorized third party. While data breach and cyber liability insurances are similar, data breach insurance's more limited scope of coverage is typically better suited for smaller businesses and businesses with low risk profiles if a decision has to be made between one or the other. Data breach insurance can cover costs associated with notifying customers, employees, or patients of a data breach, offering identity theft protection or credit monitoring services. Since data breach insurance offers only first party coverage, it would cover the cost incurred directly by the insured business due to a qualifying event. So this could cover the cost for a business to notify their customers that a data breach occurred, but it would not cover the cost for that customer to notify their customers if they were impacted. Some insurers do not have separate cyber liability and data breach policies and include both in a single cyber liability policy, or an insurer may only offer one while others have options for expanding the scope of a data breach policy to include extortion, prior acts, loss of business income, and etc. and so on. And data breach coverage may also already be included in some E&O policies. The only way to know what is included, though, is to just to read through the policy. There is no shortcut around that. If you're going to engage with an insurance underwriter or an insurance broker for yourself or on behalf of a client, you are never going to know what's in the policy unless you take the time to read it. Amount and types of coverage. So the process of deciding what types of coverage you need and what amount of coverage you need are two different exercises. While it's easy to understand that as an MSP, you need first and third party cyber liability insurance, at least I hope it's readily apparent by this point, the specifics of that coverage and what amount of coverage you need will require performing a risk assessment of your business and the risk exposure your clients represent. The same is true for your clients. They too will need to perform a risk assessment of their business and the risk exposure the MSP represents when determining what type and amount of cyber liability insurance they need. This is part of that, the principle and concept of this is all just a giant risk sharing agreement between you, your client, and the insurance companies. Risk assessments are also going to need to be performed by the insurance underwriter or broker, but typically they're going to be relying on information provided to them by the business to be insured. Now, this has changed lately. There are some insurance providers out there who now use tools to collect information about a business to be insured by installing applications on endpoints to retrieve information. But there are some insurers now who are using tools to collect information about the business by installing applications on endpoints to retrieve and verify information provided by the insurer, provided to the insurer by the company to be insured, or they even may be hiring third-party assessors to perform the assessment. The risk assessment will evaluate not just the technology in use, but also the type of business, the type and sensitivity of data processed by the business, daily workflows of employees, and other risks that the business presents. This information will help the underwriter in determining what types and the amounts of coverage that are needed, or if the business presents too many risks to provide coverage to. I see some questions coming in. I've got those queued up to answer on some follow-up slides. So the amount of coverage provided by a cyber liability insurance policy, it can vary wildly based on the risk assessment performed by the underwriter or insurance broker, but nothing prevents a business from asking for more. If the underwriter provides a quote for less coverage than what a business thinks it needs, the business can always ask to increase the coverage in exchange for higher premiums, or ask for lower premiums because they are going above and beyond the requirements asked for in the application for insurance in the first place. It's common to see cyber liability policies, coverage limits starting out at about $1 million per occurrence or $1 million aggregate per year limit for smaller, less risky businesses. If a business is subject to HIPAA privacy and security rules, then 1 million may not be enough for a large multi-office medical practice, but it might be just fine for a small general practitioner office where they only have a handful of patients. If It always depends on the total risk represented by the business. Um, and during this assessment process, the insurer um, is going to be making their recommendations based on the currency understanding of the business to be insured, and it may not be enough. Um, don't hesitate or be afraid to have a conversation with the client or with the insurer whenever you're negotiating or filling out these applications on behalf of the client, that the limits need to be higher because of XYZ, and we know this is what the potential damages could be. If you know that the damages could be higher and that you need to cover for that risk, then ask for those higher limits. And this is one of those things where um, figuring, we could have, it would be a whole other 2.5, 3 hour boot camp to go over how do you calculate what coverage and what limits should be. Usually, the way I approach it, though, and this is the way I used to approach it, is I approach it from the worst case scenario of, if anything and everything goes completely wrong, what would it cost to recover from that? So that's going to be lost revenues. That's going to be what it costs for repairing your public image, any PR, what the what your future premium increases are going to be, or what's it going to cost for the remediation and mitigation post event. How many labor hours is it going to take you to rebuild the environment if you have to rebuild the environment? The additional training that may be required post incident in order to continue to receive policy coverage, because after you make a claim, the insurer might come back and say, if you want to keep your coverage, we need you to institute these changes. All those types of things kind of have to be factored into it. And the for you yourself as an MSP, that can be a little bit easier to answer. But whenever you're uh, interacting with the insurance underwriter on behalf of a client, it gets a little bit more difficult, and you are going to have to involve the client in the process. Sometimes clients like to just hand things off to the MSP and say, you go take and handle this and I'll just pay you. While we love to offer that convenience to clients, this is one of those situations where it cannot be convenient. You need the client's awareness and buy-in on everything. You want them to be the person that in the end, the insurance underwriter can make recommendations. You can make recommendations, but in the end, it's the client that should be the person that has the final say on, this is what I want my limits to be, and I'm willing to pay these premiums in exchange for that. And there's no substitution from that process. If you don't get the client buy-in, you don't have them, that deep, meaningful consultation with them and evaluation of what the potential worst case scenario would look like and what it would cost to recover from that. If you're not having that conversation, they're going to make assumptions, and whenever and if that worst case scenario happens, they're going to go back to the, well, I assumed you had it taken care of and you knew what you were doing. It obviously wasn't. Now they're stuck in a situation of, the only way they can keep their doors open is by recovering their losses somewhere, and that somewhere may be you. So it's one of those things of, get them involved, get their buy-in, get signatures. Then there's the questionnaires themselves. And this is one of the things that, well, a lot of people have challenges with, is filling out these questionnaires. And there's a lot of reasons why there are challenges here. But don't fear them. Don't be paranoid or afraid of them. Take advantage of them. Uh, Part of the risk assessment that's going to be performed by the insurance underwriter is going to have the insured or the company to be insured to fill out a questionnaire. This questionnaire is going to ask about the assets, processes, existing security controls, previous cyber events, or prior cyber liability claims. And it's very important to provide factually correct information on these questionnaires, as well as any other questions asked by the underwriter. You never want to get creative with your answers or take shortcuts to speed through the risk assessment process. Um, and that's because misrepresentation of any information that's provided to the insurer may provide that insurer grounds to refuse to pay future claims. And just as a cautionary tale, honesty is best policy. Taking those shortcuts and having half truths in those questionnaires or in those insurance applications can and probably will cause problems and complications later. Um, and again, just as a cautionary tale, and I'm going to actually drop a link in the chat for everybody. So if you want to go and read a little bit about the actual incident that I'm referring to, it's there in the chat. Um, there was an insurance company can refuse to pay a claim or even ask a court to rescind a policy if key facts were misrepresented to the insurer during the process. Basically, you lie on the application, the insurer can come back later and say, we're not going to honor anything. Um, so if you state that multi-factor authentication is used for all privileged accounts, but in practice, you leave MFA disabled on certain accounts, or you use a tool that doesn't, or a service that doesn't support MFA, and that lack of use of MFA can be reasonably attributed to being either the cause of or contributory to an otherwise covered cyber incident, that may provide an insurer with grounds to reduce the amount paid by for the claim, deny the claim, or even sue to nullify the insurance coverage. And trying to fix things after the fact isn't going to do you any favors. The insurers will ask for proof that whatever security controls that were supposed to be in place at the time the event occurred were in place. And if you can't prove that those controls or processes were being followed and in place at the time the event occurred, the likelihood of a claim being approved is significantly reduced. This particular incident that this comes from, just as this can happen, be wary. There was a company that they misrepresented their use of MFA for administrative privileged accounts. They got hit with the ransomware attack, and the attackers leveraged a set of compromised administrator credentials for the environment that did not have MFA enabled. And then the insurer, after they found that out, they went to a court to have the court nullify the insurance contract and declared that it has no duty to defend the insured client or pay for any claims. So this is not a theoretical, you can get your hand slapped for thing. An insurer is under no obligation to pay any more than what they have to when they have to. And if they have an out, it's basically their duty to take advantage of that out. Cyber liability insurance is relatively new. Not all insurance companies are on the same page yet. And whenever you compare it to the centuries that other types of insurance have existed, it's easy to see why there's not a lot of harmony at the moment in the industry. Combining the relative newness with insurance companies entering the cyber liability insurance market at different times and the increased prevalence of cyber attacks that are happening now has created lots of volatility in the space. This means not everyone's going to be on the same page. Cyber liability insurance questionnaires go by different names. They may be referred to as cyber liability proposal forms, cyber liability insurance indication sheets, or just in cyber insurance applications. There's no universal naming convention for these forms, their format, or the number of questions they contain. Um, Other forms of insurance, they've had decades or even centuries for insurance companies to get on the same page, to get everything in line, working together. What you get from one is pretty much what you get from the other. Um, Most of this non-uniformity, though, again, you can attribute is attributable to cyber liability insurance being brand new, and insurance companies have been learning different lessons at different rates along the way. The proof of security controls or processes, that's going to be different requirements for different insurers. The ratio of coverage limits to premiums is not uniform either. So you could have a you or your client could go apply for cyber liability insurance with three different uh, providers, and each one of them may provide drastically different premiums and limits. And that's kind of the same with most insurances, but it is a much wider spread with cyber liability. You could have, one client, one provider offers $1 million for $1,000 premium, while another offers $1 million for a $5,000 premium. It varies wildly, and this is one of those situations where shopping around could be beneficial. Here's another question. Can MSPs require their clients to purchase cyber liability insurance? Yes. It is completely up to you who you decide to do business with. And if one of the requirements for you to take on a client is that they must have their own cyber liability insurance coverage of X amount, that's perfectly fine and acceptable. And there are lots of MSPs out there that do that now. And that kind of goes back to the, can't make assumptions. Not everybody has a good grasp on what is and is not covered underneath different types of insurance policies. So, and the fact that, piggybacking is not a thing. Just because, just because one person, one party to a contract has coverage does not automatically confer any benefits to the other party. So, it is 100% reasonable. And if I myself was back running an MSP nowadays, I would not be taking any clients that did not have at a minimum cyber liability insurance and data breach insurance um, of at least you know $1 million, and probably even larger for more risky larger clients. My a small little retail client that only does um, $2 million a year, $3 million a year in revenue, or EBITDA. Yeah, sure. $1 million might be enough for them. But if it's a CPA or a lawyer or a medical client, I'm going to be insisting that they probably have $5 and $10 million limits based on their size and their revenue. The next section we're going to be running into, though, are special considerations for MSPs. Since everybody here today is MSPs or other IT service providers, there's going to be a lot of peculiarities and some things that you are going to need to know about cyber liability insurance, and just the trends and the changes that are happening in cyber liability insurance nowadays, because there are a lot of changes that have been happening, and it's causing a basically, it's just causing a lot of disturbances, a lot of frustration, a lot of canceled policies, a whole lot of headaches for a lot of people. So we're going to spend a few minutes, trying to get you prepared for some of those experiences if you've not already been subjected to them. All right. So you may have seen this cybersecurity defense matrix before. If you've ever attended our building managed services to a cybersecurity framework boot camp, you've seen it there. It was developed by Sunyo Yu, and it is a great framework for understanding what tools, products, and vendors solve what problems. One of the things it does is it demonstrates that preventative measures like good asset inventory tracking, having endpoint protection, backups, email filtering, things of that nature are more dependent on technology to deliver. But after a cyber incident occurs and you move towards the response and recovery side of things, it requires the involvement of people, of human resources, which will represent greater costs in comparison to the preventative side of things. So insurance companies now have the data and the experience to recognize this. They've learned their lessons. Add in the rise in cyber attacks, data breaches, ransomware attacks, and that businesses are now more dependent on IT than ever before. This increases the likelihood that an insurer may have to pay a claim. And the more claims are filed, the lower their profits are going to be. And if they want to maintain or increase their profits, their choices are going to be limited. They're going to have to either raise their premiums or uh, decline to provide coverage for businesses that carry too much risk, or require that businesses implement better security controls and better security measures, whether that's through SOC SIM engagement with a digital forensics incident response provider on retainer, whatever it is that insurance provider decides. These are the things we want our clients to have, because we know if they have these things, it reduces the likelihood that they will file a claim, and it reduces the potential uh, total damages that may be on the claim. And MSPs are at the nexus of a lot of that right now. They're getting a lot of attention from insurers and even seeing their clients' premiums rise just because an MSP is involved with them. There are situations out there where you will see insurance questionnaires ask, do you have an MSP? And if you say, yes, we have an MSP, there are some insurers out there that treats that as a risk and will raise the premiums. This increased scrutiny is going to drive a lot of grief and frustration, but it's also, hopefully, and this is what find the silver lining. Um, this also should be driving standardization and adoption of proper security frameworks. People are going to ask, what should we do to keep our premiums lower, to reduce our premiums? And the answer is follow established best practices. And those established best practices are defined in security frameworks. Either take your pick on which one is applicable to your clients in the environments, the vertical you're in, whether that's high trust for your medical clients, NIST 800-171, the NIST cybersecurity framework, or the CIS controls. Whatever it may be, those best practices already exist. What the insurers are asking for is probably already in those frameworks. You don't have to figure it out yourself. Leverage the work that's already been done by everybody else. And that can, well, one, as far as the insurance goes, it'll make your life easier when interacting with insurers or whenever negotiating with insurers on behalf of your clients, because you've done it all before. It's standardized. It's your best practice. You don't have to guess or figure it out because it's a one-off engagement. It's common for the client of an MSP, though, to ask for assistance when filling out a questionnaire or responding to inquiries from their insurance provider. It's important that you have an established process and documentation around the how, when, and why these questionnaires or applications are filled out. Everyone on your team should receive some level of training so that they can recognize whenever a help desk ticket or a phone call comes in asking questions related to cyber liability coverage or security control, so that it can be passed off into the correct workflow or to the correct team. So with that, Your help desk should not be answering these questions. It should be a dedicated, separate process. As the MSP, you're the professional in the room who carries a lot of responsibility and risks on behalf of your client. You need to be involved intimately with any cyber liability insurance discussions that your clients are having. When assisting a client with filling out these questionnaires or applications or other insurance documentation, do not do it as ad hoc or hourly billing. This is personal recommendation here, but you really shouldn't be doing that. This should be defined in your managed service agreement or statement of work that defines the scope of the engagement and where responsibilities and, more importantly, where liabilities lie. When you perform, and that's because, well, whenever you perform work outside of the scope of your MSA, you're maybe losing the protections and indemnifications that are outlined in your MSA. It is an unnecessary risk that is easily avoidable. So include it in your MSAs from your managed service agreements from the start. Also, don't just fill out questionnaires either. It takes time and resources to properly fill one out and to make any appropriate recommendations for any discovered deficiencies. Charge for the service. It is going to take time and effort. Make sure you are compensated for the time and effort. Also, if you do something free for clients, they will perceive whatever you did as being, well, probably not that important or not that hard. And that's not the message you want them to have. If you're going to spend the time filling out one of those questionnaires and documenting it and doing everything you need to do, it could be anywhere from 1 hour to 5 hours to maybe even 10 hours of work. Get paid for it. Also, just because a client is not approaching you about cyber insurance doesn't mean it's not a concern for you. Clients of MSPs are absolutely notorious for making assumptions that the MSP will handle everything. It should honestly be something you have a conversation with all of your existing clients, and it should be a part of your onboarding or evaluation period for new clients. And you want documentations and records that those conversations were had. And whatever recommendations were made, whatever decisions were made, you want your signature on it and you want the client's signature on it. And why do you do this, or why do you go through this effort? Is because you do not allow clients to shift risk to you without you getting some type of benefit out of it. If a potential or current client doesn't want to carry their own cyber insurance and they make comments like, well, you're taking care of everything, so I don't have to worry about anything, um, they are taking advantage of you. They are shifting the risk onto you, and you have to make a decision on what the proper compensation should be for you accepting that risk, or if the risk is even acceptable. If something happens and because if something happens, they may have the opportunity to recoup their losses from you. This is why having third party, this is again another reason why the third party cyber liability insurance is so important for MSPs. Um, and why you should be engaging your clients about cyber liability insurance coverage before it's even a question that it's needed. Because by the time the question is asked of, we think we need this, they already should have had it. And in today's environments, with just the nature of the threat landscape at the moment, just about any and all businesses, whether they're small, medium, large, whatever industry they are in, they probably need to have cyber liability or data breach insurance of some type. And you have to decide if, and this is well, let's take the conversation a little bit further. You have to decide if the increase in your premium payments because a client recouped their losses by suing you and your insurance provider, Now, is that worth your client saving money? And everyone here today, your answer should be a resounding no. It's not worth your client saving money by making you assume unnecessary risk on their behalf. That's not an equitable trade. It's not to your benefit in the least. Do not allow your clients to shift that risk and take advantage of you that way. So, and this is another question that came in and it fits slots very well into this conversation. Something that a lot of MSPs have started to do is they now have opt-out provisions in their managed services agreements and their contracts. So if a client decides, I don't want that service you offer, they can sign to reject that service. We're not going to take that. And it immediately makes the contract more expensive. Because if a client says, I don't want you to offer me this service around security because I don't want to pay that money, well, that client has just made themselves a larger risk exposure for you. Therefore, to make that an equitable arrangement, you need to now charge them more for that increased risk. A lot of clients are going to say, well, why should I pay you more if you're not going to do the thing? It's because you are making my relationship with you more risky, because you're not going to pay for us to use, in the case of Enable, you're not going to pay for us to use MailaSure to filter your inbound and outbound emails and to implement some type of data loss protection on outbound emails. You have become a higher risk client. Therefore, I must charge you more to make the relationship worthwhile for me. So that is one great way of addressing those situations where um, clients either say, we don't want you to do this, that's fine, but you're going to pay more, or for your clients that don't have cyber liability insurance themselves. Um, I talked about this a little bit previously that, it is perfectly acceptable for you to decide you don't have cyber liability insurance of your own. Therefore, I am not going to have you as a client. That is a perfectly reasonable stance to take. Another reasonable stance to take is that if you're not going to carry cyber liability insurance, here's an additional, addendum to the managed services contract that's got all types of indemnifications and assumption of liability that the client has to take on because they're not going to carry that their own insurance, and that's going to be an additional 10%, 15%, 20% on what the contract would have been otherwise. There are all types of ways to handle the situation, but in the end, your goal probably is going to be to encourage the client to take those services, to get their own coverage, because it is in their best interest and in your best interest that they do. And sometimes clients and customers just make the assumption you're trying to make money by selling them more things. And it can be a challenge to sit down and have a meaningful um, conversation where it's just laid out that no, this is as much for your benefit as it is for ours. And that is whenever your soft skills and your abilities as a salesman comes shining through. So now we're moving on to engaging with underwriters and insurance brokers. So depending on if you're engaging with an insurance provider that deals directly with MSPs or is in the MSP channel versus you're interacting with an underwriter for your client's existing insurance. Well, they may not know, they probably know less than you about cybersecurity and best practices. They're working off of a checklist questionnaire where they're just looking for yes answers so they can check the boxes, put the stamp on it, sign it, and sell you a policy. So, because of that, be willing to educate. And this is back to don't do this for free. Do this as a service, charge appropriately for it, because you're going to probably have to engage with that insurance broker or underwriter to, help them understand why you do what you do and why what you do may be better than what they're asking for. You may have to make that case. And don't hesitate to give documented answers to questionnaires. A lot of questionnaires are just yes, no, or some multiple choice options. If you're dealing with an insurance provider that is that way, and say they asks a question like, I will go with the classic sample. Do you have AV installed on all endpoints? Well, you as a responsible MSP do not use regular AV anymore. You've made the transition to endpoint protection solutions and or endpoint detection and response solutions. You've made the step up to the next tier of security solutions. The insurance provider may have no clue whatsoever what an EDR solution is and that it is immensely better at protecting an environment than traditional AV is. You may need to have, again, educate them, let them know that what we do is better, give them the justification, give them the documentation, and get them to sign on that accepted documentation that explains why what you do is better than what they were asking for and why that should be reducing your premium payments. And whenever you are working with underwriters, some of them may actually be appreciative of it. They may gladly take your professional advice about why and how they should be changing their questionnaires. Um, I have seen that happen many times where a uh, insurance provider engages with an MSP because the client gets their questionnaire and a premium increase, and then they're trying to figure out why their premiums payments increase so much. And then you have the conversation with the insurance provider. The insurance provider says, we added an extra 20% because you don't use AV. But we use something better than AV. Why are we being punished? Let's talk about why you should adjust this. So once a policy is signed, you know, that's whenever you move into the, all right, that part is over. Now what do you do? Because in all honesty, as I don't want to say scary, but as intimidating as questionnaires can be, especially whenever you're first interacting with them and filling them out, it's the easy part. Filing the claim is going to be the hard part. Um, and in order to be able to file that claim when you need to file that claim and have that claim paid, you're going to be under a lot of obligations to do a lot of things in between getting the policy and filing the claim. You're going to need to maintain any security controls that are called for in the policy. You're going to need to implement a recognized cybersecurity framework, most likely. Anything you say you are doing, you are going to need to continue to do or improve it. You're going to need to demonstrate due care. And due care is one of those funny legal terms that gets tossed around a lot whenever you start getting into um, uh, claims and negotiations. You need to be able to say that you, as a reasonable professional, did what any other reasonable professional in your position would have done. So that would be if you discovered that there were vulnerabilities in the client's environment, or if you discovered that there were vulnerabilities in your environment, you should go address those vulnerabilities or document why those vulnerabilities are an acceptable risk. If it's for the client's environment, do not take it upon you to make the decision. You document it, you put it in front of the client, maybe you add it to, maybe you maintain a risk register or you work off of risk acceptance letters. Whatever it is, you put it in front of the client, explain it to them, and get their signature that they will accept the risk. Because if you just say, well, I know that client's never going to pay me or to address this, or I know that client is going to continue to use this end of service software because they don't want to buy a new license, That is fine if they make that decision, but you want to have that decision be their decision. You want it to be recorded. You want it in a risk register or in a risk acceptance letter with their signature. That way, if that is why an insurer, the insurance company says um, we're not going to pay this claim because of this risk in your environment that you knew about, the client's kind of in a, well, you told me about it and I told you not to fix it, so it's my liability, not yours. Keeping documentations, audits, and reports, and anything else that can prove things are as they should be. A great example of this is if you have to file an insurance claim because a laptop with sensitive information was stolen or lost. You're going to need to be able to prove that BitLocker or another drive encryption or another encryption method was enabled and working on the endpoint at the time it was lost or stolen. Um, if you're using our Insight RMM platform, you can use the Bitdefender disk encryption management. Or if you want to roll up your sleeves and do it a little bit more manual, you can use the items we have in the automation cookbook to check the status of BitLocker, to enable BitLocker, to retrieve the BitLocker keys if you want to. But whatever you decide to do, you're going to need to be able to, when you need, prove that it was enabled, that you were implementing the security controls as they should have been implemented based on, well, what you said you were going to do as part of, your the initial application for insurance. All right, so we got another little Q&A section here before we move in to some samples of the question and the questionnaires themselves. I think I've answered all of the questions so far that have come in. If I missed a question, I apologize. Drop it back into the questions panel so it winds up on the bottom and I can address that for you. And we're going to leave this kind of leave this open for the next minute to see if anybody adds in any questions. If not, we'll move on to the next section. Here, and there's a great question in here. So earlier you said that working with an MSP can cost a client more. Yeah, it can increase their premiums. Are internal IT personnel seen as more secure than outsourced IT? It's not that they're seen as being more secure. It is simply the fact that statistically, an MSP is a larger target and a gateway to multiple businesses. So it's just based purely on the statistics of once an MSP is involved, the potential attack surface for that business has been expanded. And that's why a lot of insurance providers are, if they see an MSP is involved, they may have a raise on the premium by a few percentage points. It's not that the MSPs are less secure or that the internal IT is demonstrably better. It's simply the fact that your attack service is now larger once an MSP is involved. Now, an MSP is able to combat that though. If you can sit down and show the insurance provider why what you're doing and how you're implementing your services is better and making the client more secure, then you can have that back and forth negotiation with them to see if you can get the premiums lowered. And this is one of those consequences of MSPs are more known now. Insurance companies have a better understanding of the role of MSPs, and they also have a better understanding that MSPs are popular targets for advanced persistent threat groups, state-sponsored hackers, and just that whole part of the cyber threat landscape that we all have to deal with now. All right, that's the only question we got in, so we'll move on to the next section, which is types types of questions you should be expecting whenever you're filling out these questionnaires. it's highly unlikely that if you take a cyber liability insurance questionnaire or application provided by two different insurance companies, that many, if any, of the questions are going to match. And this owes back again to cyber liability insurance's relatively young age, and that insurance companies did not all start offering it at the same time, giving some insurance providers more time than others to further develop and refine their products and their services. This inconsistency and the differences of one business's IT infrastructure from another makes it impossible to go out and grab a template from online for answering these questionnaires with meaningful and accurate information, making each one a unique experience. While these individual questions can vary, and these individual applications they are going to vary. No two are going to be alike. They still can be grouped into a few broad categories. Uh, One is first is general information. This is going to be stuff like company name, revenue, capital expenditures, investments, etc. There's going to be questions around people, so roles and responsibilities. There'll be technology questions about what kind of information technology solutions are in use, what type of single point solutions are being used. Processes. This will be how technology is used in the business, workflows, incident response plans, things like that. What is going to happen when X or Y occurs? Data and data collection. This is showing up a whole lot more recently in questionnaires. Uh, Type of data being held, who owns it, who processes it, how is it protected. Then there'll be questions that are around security controls, such as secure IT configurations, physical security, best practices. Is the NIST, CSF, or CIS controls being followed, or high trust, or something similar? And then also historical and previous claims, such as, has previous claims been filed, have previous events occurred, and we're going to start with the general information. So these are questions and samples I have pulled from a collection of um, cyber liability applications and questionnaires that have been um, released, produced, made available in the past 7, 8 months or so. Uh, General information. It's going to be things like the company name, the name of any subsidiaries to be included in coverage, the employee count, employee turnover rate, client turnover rate, nature of the business and the industry, gross revenue over the last 12 months, the future 12 months, foreign revenue, percentage of your revenue that is from foreign sources, your website address, because some insurance providers now want that public facing information from you so they can engage their own third party services to go say, hey, here's a website address for a company that does online sales. Go do a vulnerability assessment for us and bring that back as part of the evaluation process. Whenever you're going through this process for yourself as a business, this is fairly easy information to come up with. It's easy to find this information and present it. Whenever you're engaged with an insurer on behalf of a client, though, the client has to be involved with this part of the process. They have this information. You cannot make up this information for them. You cannot guess about this information. You need that client to be engaged with the process so that you can get truthful information. Clients love to pass things off to the MSP, pay for the service, and have things done for them. But this is one of those situations where the MSP and the client need to work together through the process, because these are things that you simply are not going to know as the outsourced IT support and security provider. So questions out of the people category. This is one that I'm seeing in various forms coming up more and more often, especially with policies that have higher limits. Do you have a chief privacy officer, data protection officer, or chief compliance officer who is responsible for your adherence to data protection and privacy legislation? If you are supporting small businesses, it is almost a guarantee that they do not have this. If you're supporting medium businesses, and keep in mind, medium businesses, small businesses, are still considered small at 500 employees. Um, Even some medium-sized businesses do not have somebody with this responsibility. If though you have a relationship with a client, a lot of times this responsibility is on the MSP, or it is assumed that this responsibility is on the MSP. This is why having well documented, having well scoped managed service agreements and statements of work is so important, because if honestly, if you don't tell a client that no, we do not handle this part of your business or the security of your business for you, they're probably going to assume that you are. And also, if you're not saying that you're not, or it's not in your scope, no, you don't want to have those, potential liabilities hanging around your neck just because your managed services agreement wasn't scoped well. But a lot of MSPs do offer this, and they're offering this in the form of virtual CISO or virtual um, compliance officers, where you're taking on that responsibility for the client. If you are taking on that responsibility, though, it should be accounted for in your managed services agreements, in your contracts, so that you are being properly compensated for it, so that you will put in the necessary resources and effort to do it the way it needs to be done. Because if you just say you're going to do it and you're not being compensated to do it, that means you may not have the available resources to do it appropriately. For another set of questionnaires, they're usually in the people category. Do you perform background checks on employees? Or another variation, do you perform background checks including criminal, educational, and credit? Um, these are those you have to have the client engaged with you during the process. They're going to need to be available to answer these types of questions, because you're probably not going to be aware or privy to this process if they have it internally most of the time. Um, Again, this is something that shows up typically in policies with higher limits, but it is showing up more often, especially whenever the processing of sensitive data is involved. If you're filling out this questionnaire and you say, yes, we do process sensitive data and we do store it on site and it is processed by our employees, but then you turn around and say, but we don't do background checks on any of our employees, which means they all have access to this sensitive data, that's a red flag, and it is going to increase your premiums. Another common set of question, is any of your data processing or information security outsourced to a third party? Raise your hand if you're an MSP, because well, that is your part of the engagement. You are that outsourced resource. Uh, and do you require the third party to have their own cyber liability insurance? This is showing up a whole lot more in various shapes and forms. And that is because, well, the insurance industry is realizing that everybody needs their own coverage. Well, insurance companies, they already kind of knew that, because well, we want as many people to buy insurance from us as possible, because that means we make more money. But oh, we need people to have their own coverage that are involved with third party agreements, because it reduces the likelihood that the third party may sue to recoup their losses, because they don't have their own insurance. And if your third party does not have their own coverage and something happens, they have to recoup. You don't want it to be through you, and neither does your insurance provider. So that's why this is showing up more often. It's also showing up in, this is also something that is, excuse me, this is also something that's starting to show up in contract negotiations for uh, public entities, municipalities, townships, states as well. Then on to some technology questions. And as I go through this, feel free, add the questions into the questions panel. If you think there's you have seen a similar or even a different question and you kind of want to see, well, all right, how or what should we answer with? Here's a great question. This is one of those top of mind things for MSPs. What if an MSP is attacked and the impact spreads to their end clients' networks? Will the MSP cyber liability insurance cover both the MSP and the end client? Short answer is no. That's why we go back to the everybody needs their own coverage. Now, whenever we break down that scenario a little bit more, let's talk about two different scenarios. Let's talk about a scenario where through no fault of the MSP whatsoever, they did everything the way it should be done, and they were still their client was still compromised because of the MSP. That would be a situation where the client's cyber liability insurance should probably be carrying the brunt of the carrying the brunt of it. Now, that does not mean that the MSP's own um, cyber liability insurance, particularly their third party coverage, would still provide for any notifications to clients, any uh, credit protection or credit monitoring services to their clients, but it would only be underneath the third party part of their cyber liability or their data breach. Now, different situation. A MSP is attacked and an attacker leverages the fact that the MSP did not have multi-factor authentication enabled on their dashboard access for their RMM tool. That at that point becomes an error and omission situation on part of the MSP because uh, they did not execute the practice of their services with due care. So that is your fault at that point, which means it's going to be on you, and it's still going to, so your errors and omissions insurance can cover it, but the client's insurance, if they hopefully have it, should also be applying to it in some cases. The really nasty scenario there, though, is whenever the client does not have their own cyber liability insurance, they get hit with a ransomware attack because of the negligence of the MSP. They now have reasonable grounds to sue the MSP to recoup their costs, which will have to be covered by you out of your pocket or your E&O insurance or your cyber liability insurance if it has those types of riders. Uh, there is not a single type of insurance you can buy that is going to cover all contingencies and all possibilities, especially as an MSP. There are just so many different scenarios and that you may find yourself in. You will never know what those scenarios are until you find them yourself in them. But you can make a lot of very, very good educated guesses about where you might find yourself one day. And that's why it's pretty obvious that yes, you should have your own general liability insurance. Your client should have their own general liability insurance. You should not be, one should not be depending on the other's insurance. There is no piggybacking. You should also have your own E&O insurance. You should have your own cyber liability insurance. You should have your own data breach insurance. Um, and you should be highly encouraging and maybe even being selective about who you take on as the clients by insisting that they have their own insurance as well, because until something happens and the insurers start getting involved and the auditors and the forensic investigators start getting involved and maybe even things going to court, you'll never know where things are going to land in the end. So it is better to err on the side of caution and have the appropriate insurances beforehand. Um, so for back to the questionnaires and the questions you will find. Technology question. So how many IT devices are in use? How many workstations are deployed? Are IT devices local or cloud? So if you're using a cloud hosted, you're using AWS or Azure, there probably will be additional questions about how you're securing that access. How are you monitoring um, for unusual activity, things like that. And these are, kind of fairly straightforward questions. As an MSP, you'll be able to answer with any engagement you're going to be in. Um, Another question is going to be, what is your annual IT budget? This is one that shows up because, well, the insurers are going to use this to make a decision on how risky you are. If you're a business that is making $5 million a year and you spend less than 1% of your budget on IT or cybersecurity measures, that's a red flag. You are not putting enough resources and efforts into securing and maintaining your IT infrastructure. Your premiums will probably be a lot higher because of that. Um, what is your capital expenditure or operations expenditures that were made in the previous year? What's the expectations on next year's IT spend? Those are all things that the insurers are going to ask to get a feel for, how seriously are you taking it? How much effort are you putting into, securing your environments? Here's some other questions around technology. Are firewalls used to ensure only authorized access to internal networks and systems from external sources? Now, as the MSP responsible for clients' environments, this should be something you can answer because you have that knowledge. But if you are we've got all shapes and sizes here today. If you're supporting only smaller clients and you aren't really a network person, most of your clients probably have rather flat networks. And how would you answer this question? As an affirmative, yes, we do have firewall and everything's done the way it should be. Well, an example of where you would be able to, where you would have to have a no answer here is, do you have a flat network? So there's only one subnet, and you have a service or an appliance that has port forwarding done out to, through the firewall out to the internal internet so it's accessible. A NAS box, or maybe even an on-site exchange server. That would be a big giant fat no at that point on that answer because, well, you are unnecessarily increasing the risks and vulnerabilities of the environment by allowing external access to an internal resource that is not segmented or uh, protected from the rest of the environment through any way. So this would be setting up DMZs or VLANs, or otherwise keeping your resources that are available from the internet separated away from your trusted internal network. Um, is a secured VPN and MFA required to access internal networks and systems from external sources? This is a question where there is often a challenge with smaller clients because smaller clients, maybe they had RDP set up years ago. They've had port forwarding done. It's out to the open internet. Maybe they were being clever and they changed the port assignment. So it's, external, it's, port number 6,824. And then the internal port is, 7,333. But it's still just an exposed port out to the internet and it's available. It can be brute forced, it can be attacked via vulnerability, it can be gotten through via a set of compromised credentials that was purchased off the internet for $7 off the dark web. However, it happens, that's going to be perceived as an unacceptable risk. I have seen cases where that was enough for an insurer to say, sorry, we're not going to write you this policy if you continue that practice. And that's why these types of questions are showing up. They want to know that whenever somebody accesses internal resources from outside, there's proper controls and authentication in place to make sure only authorized individuals can get to it. So another technology group. So do you use antivirus? This is a very common one. Do you use antivirus, spyware, or equivalent malware protection? Are virus signatures files updated automatically? How often are antivirus scans performed? If you have made the jump to an endpoint protection platform or to an endpoint detection and response solution like SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, anything like that, not so much Carbon Black, but any of those types of next generation, next level security endpoint solutions, your answer would be no, no, and no here. And if you just answered no, no, no on the application, gave it back to the insurance underwriter, they're probably going to say, well, I can't write you a policy because you don't have any of these things. This is where having active dialogue and communication with the insurance underwriter or the insurance broker is so important, because you're doing better than that. You're doing a lot better than that. You're using next gen solutions. Let them know we are doing better than what you are asking for. Therefore, our premium should not be going up. Our premium payments should be going down because we are reducing our risk exposure. And you're only going to be able to do that, again, if you have the time and the motivation to have that interaction. And honestly, as a business, the only reason you're going to have that time and motivation is if you are charging for that time as a service. So that's why, if you're going to do this, if you're going to make this engagement on behalf of your clients, get paid for it. Because if you're not getting paid for it, everybody here will admit, if you're not being paid for something, you're probably not going to do it to the best of your capabilities. You're going to take shortcuts. You're going to kind of try and get it done out of the way because there's other things you need to do that do make you money. So don't stack the deck against yourself. Charge. And do all endpoints have an endpoint detection and response solution in place with events centrally collected? This is another one that is starting to show up a lot more often on questionnaires. And that's because this is that difference between an insurance provider that's still getting their feet wet in the space and an insurance provider that has learned the hard lessons or has the appropriate resources to understand and know that, no, we should not have our insured entities having a bar set as low as just having AV. We need them to step it up. We need them to be on an endpoint solution with centralized centrally collected events. You may also see this take the form of, are events are detected threat events logged and centrally collected, or are you using a SIM, or are you using a SOC solution? If you're using an endpoint detection and platform solution like EDR, SentinelOne, explain that to the insurance provider. Let them know what it is, how it operates, how it satisfies some of those requirements. And then we're getting into processes. So this is the things where it's not a point solution or yes, we do this thing. It's or we have this service. It is are you doing these practices? One of them that is really, really becoming almost universal across the board is there a patch management policy in place and is it enforced? If you're using Insight, RMM, or N-Central, you can easily say, yes, we are. That would be an easy checkbox for you to say yes and just move on to the next thing. Another question I'm seeing is, once identified, are security patches prioritized based on severity and or likelihood of exploitation? If you have ever attended my security office hours that I do every Thursday after every patch Tuesday, that is one of the things I always come back and harp on is you should not be applying patches solely based on severity. Because if you apply, you have your policy or your configuration set up so critical patches are applied within 7 days, but importance aren't applied for a whole month. Well, the problem with that approach is that criticals may not be under active exploitation, but the important ones, vulnerabilities, may be under active exploitation. And that's why that question is now being asked. They want to know what the lay of the land is to make sure that you're not just, well, one, that you're not deferring security updates and patches for too long, and that you're applying them with proper prioritization. Um, are all vendor bank payment account information verified before being added to account payable systems? This is another one of those, you as an MSP, you can easily answer that question for yourself, but whenever you're doing it on behalf of a client, the client needs to be involved. And you probably should be assisting them, since you're responsible for helping them with their security. This should be something you're assisting them with. And this is because of things like business email compromise attacks, where there is really not technology solutions. This is training and human education that combats against these established processes. Because if somebody suffers, with a business email compromise attack, it's a social engineering attack. Somebody fakes or spoofs an email account. Sometimes they do it really well, sometimes they do it horribly. Most of the time, it doesn't matter how successful they are there. It's about the content of the email, the repertoire between the victim, the target victim, and the attacker, and what the attacker can convince that target to do in real human meat space. So, and that goes to the next one, which is there an established and auditable process to authenticate fund transfer requests prior to execution? So, whenever somebody receives a request, however they receive that request to wire or transfer money from one account to another account, is there additional checks and balances and controls in place, such as does whenever a request for a transfer is made, who is supposed to be called and have verbal approval given? Is there a written physical application or form that has to be filled out and signed? What are the additional controls outside of somebody simply asking in an email, please transfer X amount of dollars to this account? And one of the reasons why this is showing up so much on these questionnaires now is, if you check there was a flash alert from the FBI related to one of the, I think it was a Joint Five Eyes report, where they were showing, what are the financial losses due to different types of cyber events, cyber threat events. And ransomware was impressive. It was an impressive number. I can't remember exactly what it was off the top of my head, but it was this big, giant, impressive number. But whenever you looked at the business email compromise losses, it was almost 10% higher, 10 times higher. And that's because, as easy as ransomware attacks are becoming for attackers to perpetrate, it's even easier for somebody to just send an email from a John Smith CEO at company.com email to somebody and simply just ask them, will you please transfer $2 million to this overseas bank account? All right, we're down to the last 30 minutes. We're going to plow through the last set of some of these questions we've got in here. And again, as we go along this, add questions as we ask questions as we go. We'll still have a good 10-minute section at the end so that we can still answer some more. Some additional process questions. How often is critical data backed up? Are data backup stored offsite and in immutable fashion? What is the RTO and RPO established for mission critical systems? And that one is there to basically assist the insurer with estimating, if something happens, how long are they going to be down, and how is that going to affect their revenue losses? And are backups of data automated or manual? You will get a big giant ding on your premiums now if your backups are manual. They do not like seeing that anymore. They want to see automated backups, especially automated offsite immutable backups. And it's not everywhere. Not every policy is asking for this, but it's showing up a little more often, a little bit more often, a little bit more often as the insurance providers learn lessons and realize that there are better services and solutions and ways of doing these things. They will start insisting that those services, those tools, those processes are in place. Are designated individuals trained to handle forensic evidence and make reports to appropriate law enforcement, state, federal agencies in response to a data breach or suspected intrusion? I found this one on a policy, and full disclosure, this is from a company that does not issue small policies. I think their minimum policies are like $30 million. But So this is one of those situations that as an MSP, you may not be able to say, yes, we have those internal individuals. Most MSPs probably don't. You probably have engagements or retainers with an MSSP, with a SOC provider, or with a digital forensics incident response provider. Um, this is one of those cases where answer the question, say no, but get in front of the client and explain and have the conversation with the client that I'm going to say no here because this is not in our scope of engagement. This is not in our managed services agreement. You have not asked for this. We don't provide it. But your insurance provider is now saying they would like you to have it. We can help you find that service. Let us liaise for you. Our business continuity plans in place that include contingencies for cyber threat and related events. So basically, do you have disaster recovery and business continuity in place? Is it documented? Are assigned, are the individuals responsible for it aware and trained that they're responsible for it? Is there a designated hot site or other appropriate redundancies for critical operations? And we got some more questions in. We'll take a second to answer those before we move on to the next slide. One is Cove data protection considered immutable? Since there is not a industry recognized definition for the term immutable, it's hard to say yes it is or no it isn't. But the way Cove works, once an agent performs a backup. So after an agent backs up data to the cloud, it is there. There is nothing else that agent can do that can modify, overwrite, or delete that data that has been backed up and is a part of your retention or your archive settings you have set up. The only way that anything can happen to that data is if you log into the management console and make the changes there by deleting those archive points or by changing your retention rates. But the data that is there, once it is backed up, and as long as it was within your retention period, cannot be overwritten or modified. So for a lot of people and for a lot of insurance provider, that is going to qualify as immutable. Another question. Here's, looks like this might be a good horror, a good horror story for everybody. Let's read this one. Yes, it's back to the business email compromise. I'll read this story real quick because hearing it from somebody that experienced it always carries more weight than just listening to a vendor, flap their lips about it. Somebody that's here with us today, they had a client, their email was spoofed and emailed one of their customers to change the ACH for the client. So if you're not familiar with ACH, that's direct deposits for banking. Is easy way of explaining it. Their customer didn't verify it properly and made the change. Consequently, the client lost that customer as a result of the problem. And they now have a client who before they were their client had their email spoofed and emailed one of their clients to change their ACH for them. So it is a problem. It is a thing that happens. And unfortunately, because it involves computers, clients will blame the MSPs a lot of times. You cannot allow your clients to make assumptions. There is a lot that can happen. It is it's hard to prove a negative, and it's hard to have a discussion with a client about everything you're not doing for them. It's an impossible task, really. But that's the purpose of having well-scoped managed service agreements. So whenever these types of things do happen, it is well defined that it was not your responsibility to take care of it. All right, additional, so data and data collection. So these types of questions you're going to be seeing are what types of potentially sensitive data is stored or processed by the business? Do you accept non-present credit card payments? How many individual records containing sensitive data do you store at any given time? How many individual potentially sensitive records do you process in a year? These are other questions that, a lot of times it requires the involvement of the client you're negotiating on the behalf of to obtain these answers. And the reason why these are in here is because, well, the more information that's handled, the more information that is stored, it statistically increases the risk associated with holding and maintaining and processing that data. It just makes you more risky to insure. Therefore, your premiums will go up. This is why if you do see these types of questions and it does not have in there a follow-up question about what are your data retention policies, or do you have a process for auditing and deleting unneeded information. If that follow-up question isn't there, that's an opportunity for you to go to the underwriter, to the insurance broker, and say, yes, we do have this large number of data entries, but we also actively audit and remove unnecessary information to reduce what we're holding. Will that reduce our premium payments? Try and make that make that justification. Security controls. These are starting to show up more often as explicit questions in questionnaires. Used to, these would not show up unless it was large insurance policies. But now it's trickling down to the smaller ones. Do you follow an established cybersecurity framework such as NIST cybersecurity framework or the CIS controls? I've also seen high trust. Are you following required SOX Bentley or PCI DSS? Are employees required to undergo security awareness training? How often? Is an intrusion detection solution in place to detect unauthorized access on endpoints on the network? These are more great opportunities for you to point out and highlight to the client that your insurance provider expects that these things are being done. They're asking you if you are doing it. And if you're not doing it, they are going to raise your premiums. So, is there a justification to be made there about, you know what? Let's get you set up and enrolled in a cybersecurity awareness training program that's going to cost you, $2,000 a year, but it's going to reduce your premiums by $3,000 a year. That's going to sound like a really good investment for your client if you make the proposition that way. If you just tell them that the insurance provider, you should be doing this because it's best practice, that kind of gets into the, well, you have to justify that it's the best practice, and then you have to also get over the, well, you just want me to buy it because you want to make money. By tying it directly to a dollar amount of this is how much money you can save, they're more likely to get on board with it and say, oh, yeah, sure, if that's going to raise my premiums, I would rather for my premiums not to be raised. What can I do to keep that from happening? Oh, that's going to be cheaper. I will do that instead. Some other security controls. So RD, KIM, SPF, and DMARC implemented for email. Is email encryption enforced for all email clients? Are all inbound and outbound emails archived? What type of DLP or data loss protection is in place for outbound emails? Um, if you do ad hoc support, if you do ad hoc services, or you do a la carte, you allow people to pick and choose. Uh, this is another great opportunity to be able to come back and say, hey, the insurance um, provider is expecting these things to be done. If they are not done, your premium will increase. Good news. I can provide you these services to keep your premiums lower. Plus, we're also improving the security of your environment, making you more productive, keeping your uptime higher, reducing the chances that you'll ever have to rely on your insurance. And our you know, personal plug for Enable here. Our MailerSure product can do all of these things. So if you have not traditionally handled this for your clients, you've kind of stayed away from it, you didn't want to take on the risk and liabilities associated with managing that for a client, we have our MailerSure product that handles all of this in one centralized multi-tenant platform, and it makes it much easier to, it makes it easier to do this at scale for multiple clients without having to, uh, redo what they already have set up for their current email servers and providers because it's just an inline email filtering solution. You don't have to, all you have to do is change your external MX records to point to us. We'll pre-process all of the emails before they're forwarded down to your email. And then you just add us on your email server so that emails are sent to us. We filter the outbound and then we send them off to wherever they go. Historical and previous claims. These are another set of questions that are showing up more often because insurance providers are learning lessons over time. Some of the questions they're now starting to ask is, has the business filed any claims due to a cyber event in the past year, in the past 3 years? Has business revenue been impacted by unscheduled downtime? Uh, is there previous or current involvement by the business in civil, criminal, or administrative actions resulting from alleged violations of federal, state, or local laws? These are pretty serious questions that they are starting to ask now. And again, this is not a question that you're going to be able to answer on behalf of the client. They're going to need to answer this, and they're going to need to, say, yes, I'm providing this answer. I'm signing it saying this is my answer and I attest that it's truthful. Because these are things that if you try to get creative or funny with the answers, you know, you're just opening yourself up to um, allowing the client to the allowing the insurer an out later on whenever you do try to file a claim. Is the business currently covered by a cyber liability or data breach insurance policy? Insurers like to see that you already have coverage and you're just continuing it. Has the business filed a claim for a covered cyber liability or data breach event in the past? Because, well, if you've had to file one once, they're going to ask, well, what what changes did you make to make sure that whatever caused that in the first place isn't going to happen again? And if they see that you didn't make any changes, they might, that's one of those red flags for them of, well, maybe you're not worth insuring. We've hit the end. We've got about 10 minutes left. We've got a few more, a few more slides to go through just to close out. They're an opportunity for you to socialize, to network, have access to individuals and other MSPs that you may not usually have access to. There's going to be 30 hours of educational content. There's going to be 5 different tracks, technical, business, sales, marketing, and security topics. There'll be some special keynote speakers. Hopefully, there's going to be actionable insights, trends, market movements that you can leverage. They'll be doing live training sessions on different enabled products with some of our sales engineers and with some of the head nerds. I'll be doing a session on automation with the RMM, specifically focusing on the automation manager, and getting that opportunity for face-to-face time with product managers, sales engineers, executives, sales managers, and other MSPs. It should be a great time. If you can get out there, I look forward to seeing you there. If you are interested, reach out to your partner success manager. Let them know you're interested. They'll be able to get you the link so you can sign up and register for it. Before we close out, and while we're going to be waiting on any additional questions to come in, if you still have any questions, throw them in the question panel. I'll still answer those. We're going to close out with a quick poll, just because, well, we need to know how, are we doing a good job or not? Keep us honest. How useful was today's session for you? 1 is not very useful at all, 5 being very useful. Again, keep us honest, because, well, if you tell us we're doing a great job, great. We know we're going in the right direction. If you tell us no, you're doing a bad job, that's just as important. It lets us know we need to adjust what we're covering, update the content, or include additional things. This boot camp, it was recorded. It should be available in the MSP Institute at a later time. I would not be able to tell you when it's going to be available. I am also producing a written version of this boot camp that'll be hopefully available as a white paper fairly soon. So everything that we covered today, plus a little bit more, will be in that white paper. So look forward to that coming out. Here's a great one. Can MSPs act as a reseller of cyber liability insurance? Short answer is no. You cannot sell or be a reseller of insurance to somebody for whom you're going to provide other services. It's considered self-dealing. It is highly illegal in many, many places for many, many reasons. You can, however, though, have a preferred list of cyber liability insurance providers that you recommend to clients. There's nothing wrong with that. But you reselling it yourself so that you can count it yourself as a one-stop shop for everything your client may need, and no, your responsibility there in the engagement is making the proper recommendations to the client on who they should potentially use for cyber liability insurance, helping them fill out that application and questionnaire, helping them implement any changes or updates or any recommendations that are required by the insurer. But that's kind of it. Oh, here's another good one. Is it legal to get a commission from that preferred vendor? No. There are other ways for you to receive benefits from the relationship, but getting, a commission is not one of them. And again, that goes back to the kind of self-dealing, you can't provide insurance or otherwise make money off of an insurance policy that is going to, in essence, be covering you or is going to be you're going to have any type of involvement in with whatsoever as either the primary or a third party. That said, and this is also another question was asked. Do we have a preferred list that I can recommend? Not one that not a preferred list that I can just hand out and recommend. But if you go out and you search for insurance providers that are specific to the MSP space, they have a ton of resources and programs and benefits that you can take advantage of that would, probably, make it worth having that relationship with them. But it's not going to be in the form of, commissions or things like that. All right, everybody. That looks like that's the end of the questions. I'll leave it open here for just another minute just to get those additional questions in. Thank you, everybody, for your feedback on the poll. If you haven't voted yet, I'm going to leave it open for another 30 seconds or so. Please give us some feedback. Um, Much appreciated that you sat through a whole 2.5 hours with us today listening to the Southern Drawl. We also always appreciate it whenever you take and set aside time in your busy days to interact with us like this. It lets us know that we're putting forth something of value that you want to consume. Uh, Again, thank you everybody for attending today. Keep your eyes out for the recording of this making its way to the MSP Institute. Also, keep your eyes out for that white paper coming out in the future. Can't give you a concrete delivery date on that, but it should probably be within the next month or two that'll be available, and you should see that coming out. All right, no new questions. We're going to call it that. Close it out, and everybody have a good rest of your day.